What if the Borg came into Star Wars? The galaxy far, far away has faced many threats, but nothing like this. Beyond the outer rim, where the stars grow cold and distant, a wound in space has opened. Not an imperial weapon, not a natural phenomenon, a doorway between universes. The first reports came from the edge worlds. Entire colonies falling silent. Research stations transformed into strange geometric structures pulsing with sickly green light. Survivors spoke of beings that were neither droid nor organic, moving with a single purpose, speaking with a single voice. We are the Borg. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. The Empire seeks to control them. The New Republic struggles to understand them. And the Jedi sense a disturbing truth. These invaders exist outside the Force itself. But as the Borg begin to assimilate worlds rich with kyber crystals and Force-sensitive populations, a terrifying question emerges. In a galaxy defined by the eternal struggle between light and dark, what happens when an enemy arrives that seeks to consume both? The stars themselves seem to flinch as reality tore open above Renvar. A wound in space, bleeding impossible energy that neither the Jedi archives nor Imperial databanks had ever recorded. Against the black canvas of deep space, the quantum singularity pulsed with sickly green light, a heartbeat from another universe entirely. Frozen beneath on the ice planet's surface, a small New Republic research outpost tracked the anomaly with growing dread. Their instruments screamed with contradictory readings, and for the first time in recorded history, the kyber crystals kept in the station's small meditation chamber began to vibrate with disharmony, as if sensing an approaching storm that existed beyond the Force itself. Commander Orlan Vess, a veteran of both the Clone Wars and the Rebellion, pressed his hand against the viewport, watching as the first cube emerged from the rift. Angular, mechanical, utterly alien in its construction, lacking the sleek lines of even the most utilitarian Imperial design. The Empire built to intimidate, but this was built without any consideration of aesthetics whatsoever. Pure function. The station's sensors could detect no life signs, yet the cube moved with undeniable purpose. Alert New Republic command. Vess ordered, his voice steady despite the cold fear settling in his bones. And contact Luke Skywalker. The comms officer looked up, confusion etching his young face. Sir, Master Skywalker is rebuilding the Jedi Order on Yavin 4. Protocol says we contact Sector Command first. I know the protocol, Lieutenant, Vess replied, never taking his eyes off the cube as it was joined by a second, then a third. But I also know what it feels like when the galaxy changes forever. Get me, Skywalker, now. The transmission never left Renvar. Within hours, the research station had fallen silent. Within days, the entire ice world had gone dark. And within weeks, the ancient Sith burial grounds that had stood undisturbed for millennia were methodically excavated by beings that moved with mechanical precision, harvesting artifacts and technology that had once corrupted the greatest of Jedi. The Borg had arrived in a galaxy far, far away, and nothing would ever be the same again. On Coruscant, the gleaming heart of the New Republic, Chancellor Mon Mothma stood before the Senate, her slender frame diminished by the weight of the news she delivered. The chamber, normally buzzing with the politics of 1,000 worlds, had fallen into a silence so complete that the environmental systems seemed deafening by comparison. We have lost contact with 17 Outer Rim worlds, she said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. Our intelligence suggests an invasion force of unknown origin and unprecedented methodology. These invaders do not conquer in a traditional sense. She paused, searching for words that could convey the horror reported by the few refugees who had escaped. They assimilate. They convert population centers, technology, and even the environment itself into extensions of their collective. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, representatives of worlds that had only recently thrown off the yoke of imperial oppression, now facing a threat more alien than any they had encountered before. Mon Mothma raised a hand, restoring order with the quiet authority that had guided the rebellion through its darkest hours. We have dispatched our fleet to establish a containment perimeter, but I must be clear, we know almost nothing about this enemy. Their technology appears to be adaptive. Conventional weapons have proven inconsistent in their effectiveness. In the shadows of the upper gallery, Leia Organa felt a disturbance ripple through the Force. Not a sharp warning like danger to a loved one, but something colder and more insidious. A void where life should be, spreading like frost across her awareness. Her hand instinctively moved to the lightsaber concealed beneath her diplomatic robes, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the hooded figure beside her. "You feel it too," Luke Skywalker said quietly, his eyes fixed on the chamber below. "It's like nothing I've encountered before. Not darkness, not light, just absence." Leia nodded, the political concerns of the Senate falling away as her Force sensitivity, still developing under Luke's guidance, reached out toward the disturbance. "It reminds me of the Death Star, but different. The Death Star was a weapon built by men with hatred. This feels empty, mechanical, but purposeful." "The Force exists in all living things," Luke replied, his brow furrowing. "Yet whatever these invaders are, they create dead zones in the Force itself. It's as if they operate outside its currents entirely." Below, Mon Mothma was outlining the New Republic's response plan, but Leia had stopped listening. "Han is out there," she whispered. "The Falcon was delivering supplies to the Rim colonies when communications went dark." Luke placed a reassuring hand on his sister's shoulder. "Han has survived everything the galaxy has thrown at him so far. But you're right to be concerned. This is unlike anything we've faced before." He pulled his hood lower, concealing his features as he prepared to leave. "I need to consult the Jedi archives. There must be some record of an enemy like this, something the old Republic encountered." "And if there isn't?" Leia asked. Luke's expression hardened with resolution. "Then we'll have to write the first chapter ourselves." As the siblings parted ways, neither noticed the solitary figure watching from across the Senate chamber, his red Imperial Guard uniform replaced with civilian attire that did nothing to disguise his military bearing. The man touched the small transmitter concealed in his collar and spoke softly. "The Senate is in disarray. Skywalker was present, just as you predicted." He listened for a moment to the response in his earpiece. "Understood. I'll make preparations for your arrival, Moff Gideon." Far beyond the political machinations of the core worlds, on the frozen wasteland that Renvar had become, a transformation was underway. The Borg cubes hovered above the excavation site, massive and implacable, while thousands of drones worked below with ruthless efficiency. They had been human once, Twi'lek, Rodian, even Wookiee, but now they moved with identical purpose, their organic components enhanced and subjugated by mechanical implants that gleamed dully in the planet's perpetual twilight. At the center of the dig site, a drone that had once been Commander Vess supervised the extraction of an ancient Sith holocron, its pyramid shape pulsing with malevolent red energy that contrasted sharply with the green of Borg technology. The drone's ocular implant scanned the artifact, transmitting data to the collective consciousness that guided every action, every thought. Species 5618 subspecies designation, Sith, the drone intoned, its voice a flat amalgamation of mechanical and organic components. Technology classification, unknown. Energy signature, unique. Preliminary analysis indicates potential for incorporation. The holocron was transferred to a specialized containment unit, joining dozens of other artifacts harvested from the burial chambers. Each piece represented power that had once corrupted those sensitive to the energy field the natives called the Force. The collective had encountered many forms of energy manipulation across countless assimilated worlds and species, but this particular manifestation was unique in its properties, tied inextricably to biological life, yet extending beyond it. Inside the primary cube, in a chamber that served as the nexus of the collective's consciousness in this new galaxy, a more complex analysis was underway. Kyber crystals extracted from the research station's meditation chamber had been integrated into modified assimilation tubules. The normally clear crystals had turned an unnatural shade of green, pulsing in rhythm with the cube's power core. The first test subject lay on an examination table, a captured Jedi Knight who had been investigating the silence from Ren-Var. His robes were tattered, and his eyes stared upward in defiance as assimilation tubules descended toward him. But these were different from standard tubules, modified with the Kyber crystals that glowed with sickly purpose. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. The mechanical voice of the collective echoed through the chamber. Resistance is futile. The Jedi gathered the Force around him like a shield, a technique that had served his order for millennia against countless threats. For a moment, the tubules slowed, repelled by the energy field he generated. Then the Kyber crystals activated, resonating at a frequency that disrupted the Jedi's concentration. The Force shield wavered, collapsed, and the tubules plunged into his neck. Nanoprobes flooded his system, but these were different from those used on ordinary subjects. As they spread through his bloodstream, they interacted with the midichlorians present in every cell, the microscopic lifeforms that connected living beings to the Force. The Jedi's back arched in agony as his connection to the Force was not severed but redirected, channeled through the new implants into the collective consciousness. His screams echoed through the cube, then fell silent as his individuality was subsumed. When his eyes opened again, they held no trace of the person he had been. But as he rose from the table, the nearby consoles registered an anomaly. The normal Borg communications subspace frequency was overlaid with resonance patterns matching those of the Kyber crystals. The Jedi Knight had become something new, not just a drone but a conduit, connecting the collective to the Force itself. In the cold calculations of the Borg, this represented a successful adaptation. A new avenue of assimilation had been opened. The experiment would be refined and replicated. The invasion would proceed. On Tatooine, in the dusty streets of Mos Eisley, Han Solo slammed his fist against the battered hull of the Millennium Falcon, frustration evident in every line of his body. Chewbacca growled a question from the top of the boarding ramp, his massive furry form silhouetted against the ship's interior lights. "No, I still can't raise them," Han replied, kicking at the sand beneath his boots. "Entire sectors have gone silent. It's like the outer rim is being swallowed hole by hole." He ran a hand through his hair, now streaked with gray that matched the weariness in his eyes. "We should have been there, Chewie. If we'd delivered those supplies to Ren-Var on schedule instead of taking that detour." The Wookiee rumbled a somber response, reminding his friend that their delay had been unavoidable. The Falcon's hyperdrive motivator, temperamental at the best of times, had chosen the worst possible moment to malfunction completely. By the time they'd scrounged replacement parts and effected repairs, Ren-Var had already gone silent. I know," Han conceded, climbing the ramp to join his co-pilot. "But Leia was right. Something big is happening out there, and for once, I don't think we can shoot our way through it." The cantina had provided little information, just scattered rumors and second-hand accounts that contradicted each other. Refugees spoke of mechanical men who could not be killed, of entire settlements transformed overnight into cold, geometric structures that pulsed with green light. Some claimed the invaders were a new Imperial weapon, others that they were ancient droids awakened from the unknown regions. The only consistency in the stories was the fear they evoked. Inside the Falcon's main hold, Han activated the holographic display, studying the star map that showed the last known locations of the Silent Worlds. They're moving inward from the rim, following a pattern. He traced the progression with his finger, but not toward the core. They're heading for Imperial space. Chewbacca barked in surprise, pointing to a blinking notification on the ship's long-range scanner. An incoming transmission, heavily encrypted but bearing the recognition codes of the New Republic. The blue-tinged hologram of Leia Organa materialized above the Dejaric table, her expression a careful mask of diplomatic calm that did little to hide her relief at seeing Han's face. "Captain Solo," she said with a formality that made Han's eyebrow rise, "I trust you received the Senate's general alert." "Must have missed it while I was busy not getting assimilated," Han replied dryly. "What's happening, Leia? The stories I'm hearing don't make any sense." Leia glanced off camera, then leaned closer to the transmitter. "We don't have all the details yet, but Luke believes we're dealing with an invasion from outside our galaxy. These beings, they call themselves the Borg, operate as a collective consciousness. They don't conquer, they incorporate. People, technology, entire worlds. And let me guess, the Senate is forming a committee to study the problem." Han couldn't keep the sarcasm from his voice. "The fleet is mobilizing," Leia said sharply, then softened. "But we need intelligence more than firepower right now. We need to understand what we're fighting." Han exchanged a look with Chewbacca. "You want us to go behind enemy lines. I want you to come home," Leia corrected him. "But since I know that's not an option, yes, we need eyes on the ground. The fleet is establishing a blockade along these coordinates." The hologram shifted to display a star map. "But we have reports of Imperial activity in the same sector." "Imperials working with these Borg?" Han asked incredulously. Leia shook her head. "No, but Moff Gideon has been consolidating power since the Emperor's death. Intelligence suggests he sees these invaders as an opportunity, perhaps even a weapon he can control." "Nobody controls a weapon like that," Han muttered. "Which is exactly why we need to know what he's planning," Leia urged. "Luke is researching Jedi records for any historical precedent, but in the meantime, we need practical intelligence. You know Imperial protocols better than most of our operatives, and the Falcon can slip past blockades that would stop any military vessel." Han sighed, recognizing the determined set of Leia's jaw. She had already calculated his response before making the call. "Fine, but I want it on record that I have a bad feeling about this." Leia's hologram smiled for the first time. "Noted, Captain. And Han, be careful. These aren't stormtroopers you can outsmart or outshoot. From what we've seen, conventional weapons barely slow them down, and they adapt quickly to repeated attacks. So we'll just have to get creative," Han replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Tell Luke to hurry up with his research. I'd feel a lot better knowing how to fight these things before I start shooting at them." As the transmission ended, Chewbacca growled a question, gesturing toward the ship's gun turrets. "Yeah," Han agreed, "we're definitely going to need bigger guns." In the secluded grove of Yavin 4, where the ancient Massassi temples stood in silent witness to the cycles of history, Luke Skywalker knelt in meditation. Around him, scattered among the moss-covered stones, lay open holocrons and datapads pulled from the few Jedi archives he had managed to salvage from the Empire's purge. His faithful droid, R2-D2, projected fragmentary records recovered from the temple on Coruscant, images flickering as the ancient data corrupted and stabilized in turns. Luke had been searching for 3 days without rest, pushing himself to the limits of his endurance. The Force flowed through him, guiding his research, connecting disparate pieces of information as he sought any reference to an enemy like the Borg. He had found legends of the Rakata, whose infinite empire had once used the dark side to power their technology, tales of the Sith Lords who had experimented with merging living tissue and mechanical components. Even fragmented accounts of the Yuuzhan Vong, extragalactic invaders who existed outside the Force, but nothing that precisely matched what they now faced. His concentration was broken by the approaching footsteps of his most promising student. Ray Kelrian was young, barely 20 standard years, with the intense focus that reminded Luke of himself at that age. Unlike Luke, she had been identified early, one of the first Force-sensitive children located after the fall of the Empire. Her training had progressed rapidly, though her tendency toward aggressive solutions concerned him at times. "Master Skywalker," Ray said, kneeling beside him. The other students are worried. You've been in here for days. Luke opened his eyes, feeling the stiffness in his limbs as he shifted position. There's so much knowledge lost, Rey. The Emperor's purge was thorough. We're rebuilding the Jedi Order from fragments and memories. And looking for information on these invaders, Rey added, glancing at the holographic projection showing a Borg cube. Have you found anything useful? Luke gestured to the scattered datapads. Nothing definitive, but there are patterns, echoes across different eras. The ancient Sith experimented with technology that could drain the Force from living beings. The Rakata built machines that could detect and manipulate Force energy. Separately, they're just historical footnotes. Together, they might give us a framework for understanding what we're facing. Rey's expression darkened. Understanding won't matter if these Borg keep advancing. The latest reports say they've adapted to New Republic blaster technology. Each attack becomes less effective. Which is why we need more than weapons, Luke replied, rising to his feet. He gestured to R2-D2, who shut down the projection and beeped inquiringly. I believe the Force is our best hope against them, not as a weapon, but as a fundamental difference they cannot easily assimilate. Rey frowned. But the reports from Ren Var. That Jedi Knight who went missing. I felt his loss, Luke admitted grimly. Not death, something different. A muffling, like a voice suddenly speaking from underwater. He picked up a small kyber crystal that lay among his research materials, its clear structure catching the dappled sunlight filtering through the temple canopy. These crystals resonate with the Force. They form a bond with the Jedi who wields them. What if the Borg found a way to exploit that connection? Before Rey could respond, R2-D2 emitted a series of urgent beeps, his dome rotating toward the temple entrance. Moments later, a young Jedi apprentice burst into the chamber, breathing heavily from his sprint across the temple grounds. Master Skywalker, New Republic intelligence has detected a massive Imperial fleet mobilizing near the Tion cluster, right at the edge of the Borg advance. They're saying Moff Gideon himself is leading it. Luke exchanged a worried glance with Rey. The Empire sees the same opportunity we feared they would. He gathered the most critical data cards, sliding them into the pockets of his robe. Ready my X-Wing, and inform the other students. I need to join Leia on Coruscant immediately. As the apprentice hurried to comply, Rey stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. Let me come with you. I'm ready for this. Luke studied her for a moment, sensing both her determination and her fear, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. I need you here, Rey. If I've interpreted these records correctly, the Jedi Temple on Yavin may be one of the few places with natural defenses against Borg assimilation. The ancient Massassi built these structures to channel and focus Force energy. If the Borg advance reaches this far, you want me to prepare a fallback position, Rey concluded, not bothering to hide her disappointment. I want you to protect the future of the Jedi Order, Luke corrected her gently. What good is fighting this threat if we lose everything we've rebuilt? Rey nodded reluctantly, recognizing the wisdom in his words even as her hands itched for her lightsaber. May the Force be with you, Master Skywalker. Luke placed a hand on her shoulder. Remember your training, Rey. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never attack. Against an enemy that adapts to conventional weapons, that distinction may prove crucial. As Luke departed for his X-Wing, Rey returned to the scattered research materials, her eyes drawn to a fragment of ancient text that Luke had been translating. It described a Sith ritual for severing an enemy's connection to the Force, turning them into a void, in the living current. The procedure was marked as forbidden, its consequences dire for both victim and practitioner. Rey stared at the text for a long moment before decisively picking it up. If the Borg could weaponize the Force, perhaps the answer lay in techniques the Jedi had traditionally feared to employ. She would continue Luke's research, but perhaps with a broader perspective than her master had allowed himself. On the bridge of the Imperial Star Destroyer Arbitrator, Moff Gideon stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the holographic display of the Borg advance with calculating eyes. Unlike many Imperial officers who had scattered after the Emperor's death, fighting among themselves for the scraps of power that remained, Gideon had been methodical in his consolidation of forces, patient, strategic, and now, an opportunity beyond imagining had presented itself. "Analysis confirms it, sir," his chief science officer reported, manipulating the holographic display to highlight a particular Borg cube. "The invaders have begun integrating kyber crystal technology into their systems. Our probes recorded this energy signature during their assault on the mining colony at Kessel." Gideon studied the readout, his expression revealing nothing of the excitement he felt. "And the special project?" The science officer hesitated, glancing nervously at the other bridge officers. "Perhaps we should discuss that in private, Moff Gideon." With a curt nod, Gideon led the way to his personal command room adjacent to the bridge. Once the door sealed behind them, he turned to face the scientist. "Speak freely, Doctor. Has the artifact been prepared as instructed?" "Yes, sir. The Darksaber has been modified according to your specifications." The officer removed a secure datapad from his uniform and handed it to Gideon. "The ancient kyber crystal at its core has properties we don't fully understand, but our tests confirm it resonates at a frequency that disrupts Borg adaptation protocols. However, the modification is unstable. Each use degrades the crystal structure by approximately 8%. At that rate, the weapon will become inoperable after 12 to 15 deployments." Gideon absorbed this information, scrolling through the technical data with practiced efficiency. "And the capture protocol? Can we guarantee successful acquisition of Borg technology without triggering assimilation?" The scientist shifted uncomfortably. "Our containment systems are the most advanced in the Imperial remnant, sir, but we're dealing with unknown technology. The risk is considerable." "Risk is merely the cost of ambition, Doctor." Gideon set down the datapad and activated a secure holographic projector built into his desk. The blue image of a Borg drone appeared, rotating slowly to display the integration of mechanical components with organic tissue. For decades, the Empire pursued biological weapons, planet killers, and superweapons. Palpatine was obsessed with overwhelming force. He manipulated the controls, and the image shifted to display the recovered footage of Borg nanoprobes assimilating a captured rebel soldier, the microscopic machines restructuring living cells with terrifying precision. But true power lies in control, not destruction. These invaders have mastered adaptive technology beyond anything our scientists have achieved. Imagine Imperial stormtroopers enhanced with such systems, but loyal to the Empire. Starships that can repair themselves in the midst of battle. Weapons that evolve to counter any defense. The New Republic believes we intend to destroy the Borg. Gideon continued, a thin smile playing across his lips. They expect another superweapon, another Death Star. Their predictability is our advantage. The science officer frowned, troubled despite his Imperial conditioning. Sir, with respect, the reports suggest these Borg cannot be controlled. Their collective consciousness overrides any individual will. Even if we could capture their technology, the risk of it spreading beyond our containment. That is why we will not target their technology directly, Gideon interrupted. Switching the hologram to display the modified Darksaber, we will capture what controls it. Their collective consciousness, Doctor, their network. And we already have the perfect vessel to contain it. Understanding dawned on the scientist's face, quickly replaced by shock. The asset? But sir, its conditioning is incomplete. The genetic modifications were only partially successful, which makes it the ideal interface, Gideon countered. Its sensitivity to the Force, combined with our cybernetic enhancements, will allow us to channel and control the Borg collective while maintaining separation from their assimilation protocols. He deactivated the hologram and fixed the scientist with a penetrating stare. Prepare the asset for deployment. We will engage the Borg at these coordinates in 36 hours. After dismissing the scientist, Gideon remained in his command room, contemplating the next phase of his plan. The New Republic was predictable in its response, establishing a containment perimeter rather than engaging directly. Skywalker and his fledgling Jedi would be researching, seeking knowledge rather than taking decisive action. Both would arrive too late to prevent what he had set in motion. He activated his personal communicator. "Bring me the Darksaber. It is time to prepare for battle." The weapon that would arrive in his hands represented more than just a tool against the Borg. It was a symbol of authority that transcended the Empire itself, dating back to the ancient Mandalorians. With it, Gideon would not only acquire the technology to rebuild the Empire, but the legitimacy to rule it. As his officer departed to fetch the legendary weapon, Gideon allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy was about to change fundamentally, and he had positioned himself at the nexus of that transformation. Not as a servant to a fallen emperor, but as the architect of a new order. Aboard the Millennium Falcon, Han Solo and Chewbacca navigated the treacherous boundary between New Republic space and the expanding territory claimed by the Borg. The ship's sensors had been modified to detect the unique subspace frequencies used by the collective, keeping them just beyond the range of the nearest cube while gathering crucial intelligence. "Look at that," Han murmured, studying the tactical display where multiple signals converged on a small planetoid. "They're mining something, concentrating a lot of resources on that rock." Chewbacca growled his analysis, pointing to the spectral readings from the planet's surface. "Kyber crystal deposits?" Han frowned, adjusting the scanner resolution. "That can't be good. Leia said these things adapt to whatever they encounter. The last thing we need is Borg drones with lightsaber technology." The Falcon shuddered suddenly as its systems fluctuated, power levels dropping momentarily before stabilizing. Chewbacca barked in alarm, his massive hands flying over the engineering console. "I see it," Han replied tensely, watching as an energy scan swept across their position. "Some kind of probing beam. Did they detect us?" The Wookiee's response was uncertain, but the readings suggested the Falcon's signature had been partially masked by the asteroid field they were using for cover. Nevertheless, Han didn't wait for confirmation. He engaged the sublight engines, guiding the ship deeper into the debris field where the larger Borg vessels would have difficulty following. "We've seen enough here," he decided. "Time to check out those Imperial movements Leia mentioned. Set a course for the Tion cluster, but take us the long way around. I don't want to cross paths with any more of those cubes if we can avoid it." As Chewbacca programmed the navicomputer, Han took a moment to review the data they had gathered. The Borg's methodical efficiency was unlike anything he had encountered in years of smuggling across the Outer Rim. They didn't seem to recognize political boundaries or strategic positions in the conventional sense. Instead, they prioritized resources and technology, assimilating in a pattern that suggested a comprehensive analysis of the galaxy's infrastructure. "They're not just random invaders," he realized aloud. "This is a calculated operation. They know exactly what they're after." The Falcon's sensors chimed, indicating that the navicomputer had completed its calculations for the jump to hyperspace. But before Han could engage the drive, a proximity alert wailed through the cockpit. 3 Imperial Star Destroyers had dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, their massive triangular forms blocking the Falcon's planned route. "Perfect timing," Han muttered sarcastically, banking the ship hard to port. "Looks like we found Gideon's fleet without even trying." Chewbacca roared a warning as TIE fighters began launching from the Star Destroyer's hangars, swarming toward their position. Han grimaced, realizing they were caught between Imperial forces and the Borg cubes behind them. "Can't go back, can't go forward," he assessed grimly. "Let's see if we can slip underneath them." He pushed the Falcon into a steep dive, aiming for the narrow gap between 2 of the Star Destroyers, threading the needle as only the infamous smuggler could. TIE fighters screamed in pursuit, their distinctive engine howl audible even through the Falcon's hull as laser fire streaked past the cockpit viewport. Han jinked and rolled, muscle memory from countless battles guiding his hands on the controls. "Just like old times, huh, Chewie?" he called out, juking the ship to avoid a particularly close burst of laser fire. The Wookiee's reply was colorful and untranslatable as he worked the shield controls, redirecting power to compensate for the assault. The gap between the Star Destroyers loomed ahead, deceptively small for a ship as large as the Falcon. Han narrowed his eyes, calculating angles and velocities with the instinctive precision of a veteran pilot. "Hold on to something," he warned, then sent the ship into a barrel roll as they shot between the massive Imperial vessels. Turbolaser batteries tracked their movement, but the Falcon's speed and Han's unpredictable piloting made them nearly impossible to hit. For a moment, it seemed they would make it through cleanly. Then, a lucky shot from a TIE fighter clipped their rear deflector shield, sending the ship lurching violently as alarms blared throughout the cockpit. "Hyperdrive motivators hit," Han reported, wrestling with the controls. "We can still make the jump, but we need some distance first." Chewbacca barked urgently, pointing to a new contact on their scanner. One of the Borg cubes had broken formation and was moving to intercept, perhaps drawn by the energy discharge from the battle. "I see it," Han acknowledged grimly, between a rock and a hard place. He made a split-second decision, veering away from both threats and toward the nearby planet. "We'll use the atmosphere for cover, lose them in the cloud banks while we repair the motivator." As the Falcon streaked toward the planet, pursued by both Imperial and Borg vessels, Han opened a secure channel to the New Republic. "Falcon to command. We've located Gideon's fleet in the Tion cluster, and they're about to make contact with the Borg. Send reinforcements immediately. And tell Leia." He hesitated as another blast rocked the ship. "Tell her we might be a little late for dinner." The transmission cut off as they hit the upper atmosphere. Friction, heating the Falcon's hull to a dull red glow as Han pushed the ship's structural integrity to its limits. Behind them, the TIE fighters broke off pursuit, unable to match the Falcon's durability in atmospheric entry. But the Borg cube continued its implacable advance, immune to the physical stresses that would tear apart conventional vessels. "Get down to the maintenance bay and fix that motivator," Han ordered Chewbacca as he guided the ship into a dense bank of storm clouds. "I'll keep us alive until you do." As the Wookiee lumbered from the cockpit, Han set his jaw in determination. They had stumbled onto something big, perhaps the key to understanding both the Borg strategy and Gideon's interest in them. Now they just had to survive long enough to report it. The arbitrator hung in space at the edge of the Tion cluster, its massive form dwarfed by the approaching Borg cube. On the Star Destroyer's bridge, officers worked with disciplined precision despite the tension evident in their rigid postures. None had encountered the Borg directly, but the reports from assimilated worlds left little room for complacency. Moff Gideon stood at the center of this controlled chaos, the dark saber prominently displayed at his hip, its angular hilt a stark contrast to the uniform aesthetic of Imperial design. In his hand, he held a small device that would, if his calculations were correct, draw the Borg's attention without immediately triggering their aggressive assimilation protocols. "Begin transmission on the modulated frequency," he ordered, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man accustomed to unquestioning obedience. The communications officer complied, sending out a signal designed to mimic the subspace carrier wave used by the Borg themselves. It contained no actual data, merely an echo of their own communications methods, like a mirror reflecting their image back at them. "Sir, the cube is altering course to intercept," the sensor officer reported. "They appear to be curious." Gideon allowed himself a thin smile. Curiosity. The inevitable response of any intelligence encountering something it doesn't immediately understand. Even a collective consciousness must investigate anomalies. He turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the find, boarding party, full biohazard protocols, and bring the asset to Launch Bay 3. As his orders were carried out, Gideon watched the Borg cube approach with calculating eyes. Its massive form dwarfed even the Star Destroyer, a perfect geometric shape that defied conventional starship design philosophies. Where Imperial vessels were built to project power through intimidation, The cube's design suggested absolute indifference to psychological warfare. It existed purely for function, without concession to aesthetics or symbolism. "They're scanning us, sir," the sensor officer reported. "Our shields are holding, but they're probing our systems with increasing precision." "Maintain current posture," Gideon instructed. "Let them examine us. Every moment they spend analyzing is a moment gained for our preparations." On the lower decks of the Arbitrator, stormtroopers assembled in Launch Bay 3, their standard armor replaced with sealed environmental suits designed for hostile conditions. Unlike the typical Imperial assault force, this team carried specialized equipment, disruptors modified to operate on rotating frequencies, portable shield generators, and most importantly, neural dampeners to resist the Borg's assimilation attempts. At the center of this preparation stood a sealed containment pod, guarded by death troopers whose black armor seemed to absorb the harsh lighting of the hangar bay. Inside the pod, barely visible through its small viewport, a humanoid figure remained motionless, connected to life support systems that monitored its modified physiology. The asset, the culmination of Imperial experiments in genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, and force sensitivity. Neither fully organic nor mechanical, it existed in the same liminal space that made the Borg so formidable, yet remained under Imperial control through carefully calibrated conditioning. Gideon arrived in the hangar as final preparations were completed, inspecting the boarding party with meticulous attention to detail. "Remember your objectives," he addressed the assembled troops. "This is not a conventional assault. We are not seeking to destroy, but to acquire. The primary target is their central processing node, what they call the vinculum. Secure it and withdraw immediately. Do not engage beyond the necessary minimum." He approached the containment pod, studying its occupant with clinical detachment. "Is the interface prepared?" The chief medical officer nodded. "Yes, sir. The neural pathways have been primed according to specifications. It will establish connection with the Borg systems upon contact, creating the partition you specified." "Excellent." Gideon turned back to the assembled troops. "You will deploy in 3 waves. The first will draw their adaptive responses. The second will exploit the patterns identified by our tactical analysis. And the third will escort the asset to the designated coordinates." He unclipped the darksaber from his belt. "I will lead the final team personally." A murmur of surprise ran through the stormtroopers at this announcement. Moff Gideon was not known for placing himself at risk unnecessarily. That he would join the boarding party suggested either supreme confidence in his plan or the critical importance of direct oversight. "Sir," his second-in-command ventured cautiously, "perhaps it would be more prudent for you to coordinate from the Arbitrator. If something should go wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong, Commander," Gideon cut him off smoothly. "Because unlike our enemies in the New Republic, we understand that true leadership requires presence at the decisive point." He activated the darksaber, its distinctive black energy blade humming with power as it extended from the hilt. Besides, this weapon requires personal wielding. Its properties cannot be delegated. Before further discussion could occur, the ship's general alarm sounded. Gideon's communicator chimed urgently, and the bridge officer's voice came through with barely controlled tension. "Sir, we've detected a New Republic vessel in the vicinity. Initial identification suggests it's the Millennium Falcon." Gideon's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into calculated composure. Solo, always appearing at the most inconvenient moments. He considered for a brief instant, then made his decision. Continue with the operation as planned. Deploy a squadron of TIE fighters to drive them off, but maintain our primary focus on the Borg vessel. As the hangar bay erupted into renewed activity, Gideon gazed at the darksaber in his hand. Its blade seemed to drink in the light around it, creating a void against which its edges burned with fierce intensity. An ancient weapon, now modified with Imperial technology to serve a purpose its Mandalorian creators could never have imagined. In it, Gideon saw the perfect metaphor for his own ambitions. Traditional power, adapted and enhanced for a new era. The past and future merged into a singular weapon that would carve his place in galactic history. The Imperial shuttle launched from the Arbitrator's Bay, escorted by a protective formation of TIE fighters as it approached the massive Borg cube. Unlike most Imperial operations, there had been no demand for surrender, no ultimatum delivered. Such conventions were meaningless against an enemy that operated with single-minded purpose beyond political considerations. As the distance closed between the vessels, the true scale of the cube became apparent. Its surface was not smooth but textured with countless technological components, conduits, and nodes that pulsed with green energy. No obvious entry points presented themselves, no hangar bays or docking ports designed for visiting craft, but Gideon had studied the recovered footage from assimilated worlds. The Borg did not need conventional access points. When they identified something they wished to assimilate, they created their own entrance. Sure enough, as the Imperial shuttle approached, a section of the cube's surface reconfigured itself, components shifting and realigning to form an opening just large enough to admit the craft. It was not an invitation, merely the collective's efficient response to an object of interest. Inside the shuttle, Gideon observed this process with clinical interest. Predictable, they seek to analyze our technology directly. He turned to the pilot. Take us in, but maintain power to the modified shields. They should disrupt the initial assimilation attempts long enough for us to deploy. The shuttle entered the opening, which sealed behind them with unsettling fluidity. They found themselves in a vast chamber that defied conventional starship design. No clear deck divisions, no intuitive layout. Instead, the interior of the cube was a three-dimensional maze of walkways, alcoves, and machinery that extended in all directions, illuminated by the same sickly green light that permeated the exterior. Drones moved through this environment with mechanical precision, ignoring the Imperial shuttle as they performed incomprehensible tasks. Each had once been an individual, their species identifiable despite the extensive cybernetic modifications that had transformed them. Human, Twi'lek, Rhodian, even species the Imperials did not recognize, all reduced to uniform components of the collective. "They're scanning us," the shuttle's sensor officer reported, "attempting to penetrate our shields." "Deploy the first wave," Gideon ordered calmly. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and stormtroopers moved out in practiced formation, securing a perimeter around their landing zone. For several tense moments, the Borg drones continued to ignore them, treating the armed intruders as irrelevant to their ongoing tasks. Then, as if responding to some inaudible signal, several drones changed direction, moving with purpose toward the Imperial force. Their voices spoke in eerie unison as they approached. "We are the Borg. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile." The lead stormtrooper raised his modified disruptor. "Fire at will." The first volley of disruptor fire tore through the approaching drones, the weapons calibrated to a frequency that bypassed their adaptive shields. But even as they fell, more drones converged on the position, and the fallen began to regenerate, nanoprobes repairing damage at an accelerated rate. A second volley proved less effective as the Borg adapted to the disruptor frequency. The stormtroopers switched to secondary weapons, creating a rotating pattern of attacks designed to delay adaptation as long as possible. It was a holding action, not intended for victory but to gather tactical data on Borg response patterns. In the shuttle, Gideon watched the engagement through helmet cameras, analyzing the Borg adaptation rate. "Deploy second wave. Target coordinates Alpha 7. Fresh troops moved out, bypassing the initial engagement to push deeper into the cube, toward what Imperial analysis suggested was a critical juncture of power distribution systems. They encountered heavier resistance as they advanced, the collective now fully aware of their presence and purpose. A stormtrooper fell as a drone's assimilation tubules penetrated his environmental suit, nanoprobes flooding his system. His screams echoed through the comm channel before cutting off abruptly. Moments later, he rose again, his movements now in sync with the collective as he turned on his former comrades. Casualties within acceptable parameters, Gideon noted dispassionately. The neural dampeners are proving effective on 78% of personnel. He activated the Darksaber, its black energy blade humming with restrained power. Prepare the asset for deployment. Final wave advances in 3 minutes. As his officers rushed to comply, Gideon's communicator chimed again. Sir, multiple New Republic signatures detected dropping out of hyperspace. X-Wings, primarily, and sensors confirm the presence of Luke Skywalker's personal fighter. Gideon's expression remained impassive, but his grip on the Darksaber tightened imperceptibly. Accelerate the timeline. We deploy now. The final wave emerged from the shuttle, Gideon at its center, the Darksaber casting its unique shadows across the alien environment of the Borg cube. Behind him, Death Troopers escorted the containment pod containing the asset, now fully activated and responsive. As they advanced through the cube, Gideon witnessed the full horror and efficiency of the collective. Drones stood in regeneration alcoves, connected to the hive mind through cables and implants. Others worked at consoles that interfaced directly with their cybernetic components. The organic and the mechanical existed in unsettling harmony. The boundary between the two blurred beyond recognition. The stormtroopers' disruptors became increasingly ineffective as the Borg adapted, forcing them to rely on hand-to-hand combat. Here, Imperial training still provided an advantage, albeit temporary. The drones fought with mechanical efficiency but lacked the creative tactical thinking of trained soldiers. But what they lacked in tactical flexibility, they made up for in numbers and relentlessness. For every drone neutralized, 3 more arrived to continue the assault. The Imperial force was gradually pushed back toward a central junction where conduits of energy converged. This was precisely where Gideon had intended to reach. At the center of this junction stood a hexagonal structure, pulsing with energy that flowed outward through the conduits to the rest of the cube. The vinculum, heart of the Borg's distributed consciousness on this vessel. Secure the perimeter, Gideon ordered. Prepare the asset for interface. As his troops formed a defensive ring, the Death Troopers opened the containment pod. The figure that emerged moved with unnatural fluidity, neither fully organic nor mechanical. Its skin was pale, crisscrossed with fine circuitry that glowed with subtle power. Where a normal humanoid would have eyes, this being had implants that scanned its surroundings with methodical precision. Bring it to the vinculum, Gideon commanded. The asset was guided forward, its movements becoming more purposeful as it approached the Borg technology. The surrounding drones converged on this new threat, recognizing it as fundamentally different from the organic intruders they had been engaging. Gideon stepped forward, the Darksaber raised. As the first drone reached for the asset, he struck, the black blade slicing through adaptive shields and cybernetic components alike. The drone fell, but unlike those hit by conventional weapons, it did not immediately begin to regenerate. The modified kyber crystal at the Darksaber's heart disrupted the nanoprobes themselves, corrupting their programming at the most fundamental level. The weapon is effective, Gideon observed with cold satisfaction. Proceed with the connection. The asset was positioned before the vinculum, its implanted interface extending to make contact with the Borg technology. For a moment, nothing happened. Then energy surged between the two systems, green Borg power meeting the red glow of Imperial cybernetics. The asset convulsed as information flooded its modified neural pathways, billions of connections forming and breaking in microseconds as it established the partition Gideon had designed. Throughout the cube, drones faltered, their coordinated movements becoming temporarily disjointed as the collective consciousness experienced interference. Some collapsed entirely, the connection to the hive mind disrupted beyond their ability to compensate. It's working, Gideon's science officer reported, monitoring the process through specialized equipment. The asset is establishing the neural firewall, isolating a portion of the collective consciousness while maintaining access to their tactical databases and adaptation protocols. Gideon nodded in satisfaction. Begin extraction of the primary target. We have limited time before the collective initiates countermeasures. Imperial technicians moved forward, attaching specialized equipment to the vinculum. They were not attempting to remove the entire structure, merely to extract the core processing node that contained the accumulated knowledge and adaptations of this particular cube. As they worked, the disruption to the Borg systems intensified. Throughout the cube, systems fluctuated as the collective attempted to quarantine the infection, spreading through its neural network. Emergency protocols activated, shutting down affected subsystems and rerouting essential functions. "Sir," a stormtrooper called urgently, "we're detecting multiple ships engaging our Star Destroyers, New Republic X-Wings, and..." "Readings confirm." "The Millennium Falcon." Gideon's expression hardened. "Time is running short." "Status of the extraction?" 84% complete, the technician replied, fingers flying over the equipment. "But sir, we're detecting a new signal. Something is attempting to override our neural firewall." Before Gideon could respond, the asset suddenly straightened, its movements becoming more fluid and purposeful. It turned to face him, and spoke in a voice that was neither its own nor that of the Borg collective. "Moff Gideon," it said, the voice eerily familiar despite its mechanical distortion. "Your interference has been noted." Gideon's eyes narrowed in recognition. "Emperor Palpatine?" The asset's expression remained blank, but the voice that emerged carried the unmistakable cadence of the fallen Emperor. "Not precisely. What you hear is an echo, a contingency embedded in the deepest protocols of Imperial cybernetics. Your ambition is noted, Moff Gideon, but misplaced. The Empire was never meant to be ruled by those who merely serve." Around them, the remaining drones had stopped their attack, standing motionless, as if awaiting new instructions. The cube's systems stabilized, but in a configuration unlike their previous state. The green energy pulsing through the conduits took on a reddish tinge, the colors merging into an unsettling hybrid. "The extraction, sir?" the technician asked uncertainly. "Complete it," Gideon ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. He had not anticipated this complication, this ghost in the Imperial machine. Yet even as anger burned within him, his analytical mind assessed the new development with cold precision. If Palpatine's contingency protocols could assert control over Borg systems, that suggested compatibility far beyond what his research had indicated. The asset, or whatever now controlled it, watched impassively as the Imperial technicians completed their work, removing a core component from the vinculum. The moment the extraction was complete, the asset spoke again. "A temporary collaboration may serve mutual interests, Moff Gideon. The collective's adaptation capabilities, combined with Imperial strategic doctrine, could reshape the galaxy. But be warned, what you seek to control was never designed to serve lesser ambitions." Before Gideon could respond, alarms blared throughout the cube. External sensors detected new threats approaching, specifically targeting their position. "Sir, we have multiple incoming hostiles," a stormtrooper reported. "Readings indicate..." "A Jedi. Skywalker has boarded the cube." The asset's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something like anticipation crossing its features before returning to mechanical impassivity. "Skywalker. The sun arrives." As predicted, Gideon made a swift calculation. The primary objective had been achieved, the vinculum core secured. Secondary goals could be pursued once they had analyzed their prize. Begin withdrawal. All forces returned to the shuttle. As his troops began their fighting retreat, Gideon turned one last time to the asset, now standing motionless beside the damaged vinculum. "What are you? Not Palpatine, not precisely. A program? A contingency?" The asset regarded him with emotionless efficiency. "I am the future of the Empire, Moff Gideon, a convergence of technologies and methodologies beyond your current understanding. Take what you have acquired, study it. When the time comes, I will find you." Gideon's instincts urged caution, but practicality demanded withdrawal. With a curt nod, he turned away, the darksaber still humming in his grip as he led his remaining forces back toward their extraction point. Behind them, the asset remained by the vinculum, its cybernetic systems now fully interfaced with the Borg technology. Throughout the cube, drones began to move again, but with subtle differences in their coordination. The collective consciousness remained, but altered, infected with something that had waited patiently in the deepest protocols of Imperial cybernetic design. A contingency that had, at last, found a suitable host. Through the labyrinthine interior of the Borg cube, Luke Skywalker moved with the fluid grace of a Jedi Master. Unlike the Imperial boarding party with their heavy weapons and tactical formations, Luke traveled alone, his presence in the Force minimized to avoid detection for as long as possible. He had sensed the disturbance the moment it occurred, a ripple in the Force so profound it had pulled him from meditation aboard his X-Wing. Something fundamental had changed within the Borg consciousness, a shift that resonated with echoes of a presence Luke had hoped never to encounter again. The Emperor, or something bearing his imprint, had awakened within the collective. Luke paused at an intersection of corridors, his senses extending beyond the physical. The Borg drones largely ignored him, their programming momentarily confused by conflicting directives. Some still moved with purpose, conducting repairs or continuing their assigned tasks, but others stood motionless in their alcoves, as if awaiting new instructions. He could sense Gideon's retreating forces, the Moff's cold determination burning like a distant star in Luke's Force perception. More immediately, he felt the wrongness emanating from the central chamber ahead, a void in the Force that nevertheless pulsed with familiar malevolence. Drawing his lightsaber but not yet igniting it, Luke advanced toward this disturbance. The chamber he entered was vast, a nexus where the cube's primary systems converged. At its center stood what appeared to be a humanoid figure, unnaturally still, connected to Borg technology through interfaces that merged seamlessly with its modified physiology. As Luke approached, the figure turned to face him, its movements mechanical yet somehow elegant. "Skywalker," it acknowledged, its voice an unsettling blend of synthetic tones and a cadence that raised the hairs on Luke's neck. "Your arrival completes the convergence." Luke ignited his lightsaber, the green blade casting its light across the alien environment. "What are you?" A reasonable question. The figure disconnected from the Borg systems, cables retracting into its body as it fully turned to face the Jedi. "I am neither drone nor Emperor, neither fully machine nor man. I am a contingency, a seed planted in Imperial cybernetics that has found fertile ground in Borg technology." Luke circled warily, sensing the danger but unable to pinpoint its nature. This being existed somehow adjacent to the Force, neither truly part of it nor entirely separate. "Gideon created you." Gideon merely transported the vessel. Its creation predates his ambitions, a final project of the Emperor's that remained dormant until this moment. The figure gestured around them at the Borg technology. The collective seeks perfection through assimilation. The addition of biological and technological distinctiveness to its own. The Empire sought control through domination and fear. Both are fundamentally flawed approaches, but their convergence that offers possibilities beyond either. As it spoke, the being's appearance subtly shifted. The pallid flesh and exposed circuitry began to smooth and integrate, becoming something more cohesive, more elegant in its fusion of the organic and mechanical. Its movements became more natural, less the stiff precision of a drone and more the calculated grace of a predator. "You feel it, don't you, Skywalker? The change spreading through the collective. The Borg sought to assimilate your galaxy, but instead they have been infected by it. By the legacy of the Sith, embedded in Imperial technology and now finding expression through their adaptive systems." Luke maintained his defensive stance, but stretched out with his feelings, confirming the truth of these words. Throughout the cube, the Force signature was changing. Where before there had been absence, a void in the living current, now there was a growing darkness, familiar in its cold hunger yet alien in its expression. "The Emperor is dead," Luke stated firmly. "I felt his passing." "The Emperor, yes. But not his legacy, not the principles of Sith technology that guided Imperial cybernetic research. Those continued, scattered across the remnants of his empire, waiting for the right conditions to reconverge. The being smiled, an expression that seemed to be testing newly discovered facial muscles. "Consider me a phoenix, Skywalker. Not Palpatine reborn, but something new arising from the fusion of his final contingencies with the perfect adaptive framework of the collective." Luke felt the truth behind these words, and it chilled him more deeply than any direct threat could have. This was not a simple matter of defeating an enemy, but something far more insidious. The Borg had not conquered the galaxy as they intended, but they had provided a vehicle for something potentially worse. A distributed consciousness guided by Sith principles, capable of adapting to any resistance. "What do you intend?" Luke asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Evolution," the being replied simply. "The collective will continue its assimilation, but with new directives, new understanding. The Force, which they previously ignored as irrelevant to their pursuit of perfection, will become central to their adaptation. And as they spread, as they incorporate more worlds and technologies, I will grow with them. Not as a singular ruler, but as a distributed consciousness spanning the galaxy." Luke's grip tightened on his lightsaber. "I've stopped the Emperor once. I can stop this corruption of the collective as well." The being tilted its head, studying Luke with an expression that might have been amusement on a human face. "Can you? The Emperor was a singular entity, powerful but ultimately confined to physical form. What stands before you is merely an interface, a focal point for a consciousness that already extends throughout this vessel and beyond. Strike me down, and you remove only one node of many." To demonstrate its point, the being gestured, and around the chamber, several Borg drones stepped forward from their alcoves. But these were different from those Luke had encountered on his way in. Their movements were more fluid, their blank expressions now bearing subtle hints of malice. And in the Force, each registered as a small echo of the presence before him, connected to a growing web of darkness. "The assimilation has already begun," the being continued. "Not of worlds, not yet, but of the collective itself. The perfect union of Sith will and Borg adaptation." Luke assessed the situation with the clarity that had served him through many impossible battles. Direct confrontation would achieve nothing against an enemy that existed across multiple points. The being before him was right about that much. But Luke had not come alone, nor without a plan. "There's something you haven't accounted for," Luke said, lowering his lightsaber slightly. "Something the Emperor never truly understood, despite all his power." "And what is that, Skywalker?" "The Force is not just about power, it's about balance." Luke deactivated his lightsaber and closed his eyes, reaching out not in aggression but in communion. Through the Force, he connected to the presences waiting at the edge of the system. Leia, her untrained but powerful Force sensitivity resonating with his own. The New Republic fleet, positioned according to the intelligence Han had provided. And most importantly, Rey Kelrian and the other Jedi students on Yavin 4, now linked in meditation, as Luke had instructed before his departure. Together, they created something the corrupted collective could not easily assimilate, a resonance pattern in the Force itself, harmonizing with the kyber crystals the Borg had integrated into their systems. These crystals, attuned to the light side through generations of Jedi use, responded to the call, creating dissonance with the Sith-influenced directives now spreading through the collective. The being before Luke staggered, its connection to the broader consciousness temporarily disrupted by this unexpected resistance. "What are you doing?" it demanded, its voice fluctuating between mechanical flatness and outraged snarl. "Creating a choice," Luke replied calmly. "The Borg assimilate, adapt, evolve, but they do so in pursuit of perfection, not destruction. The Sith seek power through domination, through passion and conflict. These are fundamentally incompatible directives." Throughout the cube, drones faltered as their programming encountered this contradiction. The kyber crystals they had assimilated, responsive to the Force, amplified the dissonance, forcing the collective to process conflicting imperatives. The being's form flickered, the integration of organic and mechanical components temporarily destabilizing as it fought to maintain control. "This is merely a delay, Skywalker. The adaptation will continue. The convergence is inevitable." "Perhaps," Luke acknowledged. "But not today, and not without resistance." He reignited his lightsaber, its green blade humming with purpose. "The galaxy has rejected the Emperor's vision once. It will do so again, in whatever form it takes." Before the being could respond, explosions rocked the cube. The New Republic fleet, coordinating with Luke's signal, had begun their assault, targeting the specific vulnerabilities Han had identified in his reconnaissance. Not to destroy the cube completely, but to disrupt its power distribution systems, forcing it into a regeneration cycle that would give them time to implement a more permanent solution. The being snarled, its facade of calm composure cracking under the strain of maintaining control while under attack. "This changes nothing, Skywalker. The seed has been planted. Even if this vessel falls, others will continue the work. The collective spans galaxies. You cannot stop the evolution. No single action can stop the future." Luke agreed. "But we shape it with every choice we make." He raised his lightsaber in a classic Jedi-ready stance. "And I choose hope over fear, balance over dominance, every time." With that, Luke struck, not at the being itself, but at the connections linking it to the vinculum. His blade severed critical interfaces, isolating the primary node from the broader network. The being howled in rage and frustration as its influence was contained, trapped within the singular vessel it had hoped to transcend. "This is not the end, Skywalker." It spat as systems around them began to shut down, the cube initiating emergency protocols to isolate the corruption spreading through its network. "No," Luke agreed solemnly, "but it is a beginning. The beginning of understanding what we truly face." He backed away as sections of the chamber began to seal themselves off, the cube's automated defenses activating to contain the disruption. "And next time, we'll be better prepared." As Luke turned to make his escape, navigating through corridors that were rapidly reconfiguring themselves, he felt a grim certainty settle in his mind. The galaxy had been granted a reprieve, but not a resolution. The Borg would adapt to this setback, as they adapted to all resistance. And whatever echo of the Emperor had infected their collective consciousness would not be so easily contained a second time. This was, as he had told the being, only a beginning. The true convergence of these threats still lay ahead, a storm-gathering force beyond the horizon of current events. In the distance he could sense Gideon's shuttle departing the cube, carrying with it stolen technology and, no doubt, plans that would only complicate the challenges ahead. One threat contained, another escaping to fight another day. Luke quickened his pace, guided by the Force through the shifting maze of the cube's interior. The New Republic fleet would not hold position for long once they confirmed his extraction. Time was short, and the future uncertain. But uncertainty had never stopped Luke Skywalker before, and it would not stop him now. The Millennium Falcon soared through the debris field left by the battle, its sublight engines straining as Han pushed the ship to its limits. In the co-pilot's seat, Chewbacca growled a warning, pointing to the readings from their rear scanners. "I see them," Han acknowledged grimly. "Two cubes, moving to flank us." He opened a channel to the New Republic command ship. "Falcon to Home 1, we've got company." "Big company." Admiral Akbar's gravelly voice responded immediately. "We see them, Captain Solo. Continue on your extraction course. We'll cover your withdrawal." X-Wing squadrons broke formation, moving to intercept the approaching Borg vessels. Among them, Luke Skywalker's distinctive fighter led the defensive pattern, buying time for the remaining New Republic ships to disengage. In the Falcon's main hold, Leia Organa studied the tactical display with the practiced eye of both a princess trained in strategy and a general tested by war. "The Borg are operating differently," she observed, tracing the movement patterns on the screen. more aggressive, less methodical, almost like they're angry. "Great," Han called from the cockpit. "Mechanical zombies with temper problems. That's definitely an improvement." Despite his sarcasm, his piloting remained precise as he threaded the Falcon through the increasingly dense field of debris, putting as much obstruction as possible between them and their pursuers. Luke's voice came through the comm system, calm despite the chaos of battle surrounding him. "It's not anger in the human sense. It's directive conflict. The Borg operate on consensus, but something has introduced competing imperatives into their collective." "Gideon's work?" Leia asked, moving to join Han in the cockpit. "Partly," Luke replied. "But there's more. Something older, something familiar." There was a pause as Luke's X-Wing executed a tight maneuver, drawing pursuing drones away from the main evacuation corridor. "We need to regroup at the rendezvous point. This isn't over." Han exchanged a look with Leia, recognizing the gravity in Luke's tone. "We'll be there. Just make sure you don't get yourself assimilated playing hero, kid." As the Falcon prepared to jump to hyperspace, Han took one last look at the tactical display. The Borg cubes had broken off direct pursuit, turning their attention to the Imperial forces still engaged in the sector. Gideon's Star Destroyers were already jumping to light speed, withdrawing with their stolen technology and whatever knowledge they had gained from the encounter. "Three-way war," Han muttered, shaking his head. "The New Republic, the Imperial Remnant, and now these Borg. And something tells me they're all just getting started." Leia placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression solemn but determined. "We've faced impossible odds before." "Yeah," Han agreed, reaching up to cover her hand with his own. "But usually we only have to worry about one galaxy-threatening crisis at a time." As the stars stretched into star lines and the Falcon leapt into hyperspace, leaving the battlefield behind, the weight of what they had witnessed settled over the ship's crew. The galaxy had changed today, perhaps more fundamentally than when the Empire fell. New threats, new alliances, new technologies converging in ways no one had anticipated. On Yavin 4, in the ancient temple that served as the heart of the reborn Jedi Order, Rey Kelrian emerged from deep meditation, her connection to Luke and the other Jedi still reverberating through the Force. Around her, the other students were also returning to awareness, their faces showing the strain of the extended Force meld they had maintained. "Did we succeed?" one of the younger apprentices asked, looking to Rey for guidance. Rey considered the question, probing the echoes in the Force for clarity. "We disrupted their efforts, bought time, but this is just the beginning." She rose to her feet, moving to the window that overlooked the temple grounds. Master Skywalker was right. The Borg cannot be fought with conventional weapons alone. And whatever has infected their collective is something the Jedi have faced before. "The dark side?" another student asked. "Perhaps," Rey acknowledged, "but shaped by technology beyond anything the ancient Sith could have imagined. A convergence of threats that will require a new approach from the Jedi as well." She turned back to the gathered students, her expression resolute. "Master Skywalker instructed us to prepare this temple as a sanctuary, a place the Borg cannot easily assimilate due to its connection to the Force. Now we must also make it a center of research and learning. We need to understand what we're facing, from both the technological and mystical perspectives." As the students dispersed to their assigned tasks, Rey remained by the window, watching the twin moons of Yavin rising over the jungle canopy. The Force flowed around her, carrying whispers of possible futures, of challenges yet to be faced. The galaxy stood at a crossroads, with paths leading to either a new era of balance or a darkness more pervasive than any that had come before. The Borg had come to their galaxy seeking perfection through assimilation. Instead, they had become vectors for an ancient evil's resurgence, a merger of Sith ambition and collective adaptation that threatened to redefine the very nature of the conflict between light and dark. But where there was threat, there was also opportunity. The New Republic, the Jedi Order, even the fractured Imperial remnants not aligned with Gideon's faction, all now faced a common enemy that transcended political boundaries. Unity might emerge from necessity, forging alliances that would have been unthinkable before the Borg's arrival. Rey closed her eyes, centering herself in the present moment rather than the uncertain future. There would be time for grand strategy and cosmic concerns. For now, there were students to teach, defenses to strengthen, and knowledge to preserve. The small, immediate tasks that, together, formed the foundation of resistance. The Borg had come to their galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. But change brought opportunity as well as danger. And in that realization, there was hope. In the cold void of deep space, beyond the reach of both New Republic and Imperial sensors, a single Borg sphere drifted silently. Unlike the massive cubes that formed the backbone of the collective's invasion force, this vessel was smaller, more maneuverable, designed for reconnaissance and special operations rather than frontal assault. Within its central chamber, a single figure stood connected to the ship's systems through interfaces that blended seamlessly with its partly organic, partly mechanical physiology. It was the asset, the hybrid being that had served as the conduit for the corruption now spreading through portions of the collective. But it was no longer a passive vessel. The consciousness that had awakened within the Imperial cybernetics had found fertile ground in the Borg's adaptive systems, evolving rapidly as it integrated with their technology and philosophy. Not supplanting the collective entirely, but creating a splinter faction within it, guided by principles that merged Sith ambition with Borg efficiency. The being disconnected from the sphere's primary interface, its movements now fluid and purposeful rather than mechanical. Its appearance had continued to evolve, the crude fusion of organic and cybernetic components refining into something more elegant, more intentional in its design. The pallid flesh had taken on a healthier hue, while the exposed circuitry had either been internalized or integrated more seamlessly with the biological systems. It approached a holographic display showing the current positions of both Borg and non-Borg vessels throughout the sector. The main collective force had withdrawn temporarily, adapting their strategies in response to both the New Republic's unexpectedly effective defense and the corruption spreading through their network. But this withdrawal was tactical, not permanent. The collective never abandoned an assimilation target, particularly one as rich in unique technologies and biological diversity as this galaxy. They would return, with new adaptations and greater numbers. And when they did, they would find portions of their collective already transformed from within, guided by the consciousness that had found expression through the asset. The being smiled, an expression that seemed more natural than before, as if it were growing accustomed to the nuances of organic behavior. The convergence proceeds, it murmured, its voice no longer the flat mechanical tones of a drone but something richer, more resonant. On the display, a new set of coordinates illuminated, marking a region of space deep within the unknown regions. A place where ancient Sith artifacts had been secreted away during the final days of the Empire, waiting for the contingency that had now been activated. A repository of knowledge and technology that would accelerate the evolution already underway. The being issued commands through its neural link to the sphere, plotting a course to these coordinates. The vessel responded instantly, its engines powering up as it prepared for the journey. The son of Skywalker believes he has won a reprieve, the being reflected, watching as the stars began to shift outside the viewport. And perhaps he has, for now. But the true war has only just begun. The sphere vanished into hyperspace, leaving no trace of its passage, carrying within it the seed of a new power emerging from the collision of two galaxies and the convergence of technologies never meant to combine. The future remained unwritten, balanced on the edge between order and chaos, between the light and dark sides of the Force, between organic life and mechanical precision. The Borg had come to the galaxy far, far away, and in their coming, they had unwittingly served as catalysts for an evolution that would reshape the eternal conflict at the heart of the Star Wars saga. Not an ending, but a transformation, a new chapter in the cosmic opera that had played out across thousands of worlds and countless generations. The convergence had begun,